I'm very impressed by your consistent, compassionate effort in the world. And I'm a Buddhist practitioner. I consider you some form of a bodhisattva, actually. But in the absence of maybe what would have given strength to, say, a Martin Luther King or a Gandhi or the Dalai Lama, like a religious faith or a religious practice, just out of sheer curiosity, I'm interested what kind of spiritual resources or you draw from, or any advice you give to people who wants to continue a kind of wholesome actions toward a more wholesome world. How to embolden ourselves and empower ourselves on a kind of heart level, because I'm just impressed by your tireless efforts and kind of curious how you keep going.
Yeah, it's a question that's asked that I just don't understand. I mean, every one of you, I mean, take, say, global warming. I'm sure that every person here cares about whether their grandchildren will have a way to survive. Do you need unique spiritual resources for that? I mean, there has to be something that prevents you from doing it. You know, that's what we should be asking ourselves. What prevents us from and it's the same on the other issues. I mean, including serious but less outrageous ones than this. Like, take the fact that for the last roughly 30 years, the United States has had economic policies, state corporate economic policies, which have led to virtual stagnation for the majority of the population. Plenty of economic growth, but into very few pockets, hedge fund managers and people like that, but not the population. Well, I think people care about that. In fact, if you look at polls, people care a lot about it. Take taxes. For the last about 40 years, there have been regular polls asking people what their attitude is towards the tax system. Overwhelmingly and consistently, people think there ought to be much higher taxes on the rich. How does policy work? Reduces taxes on the rich. It's one of many illustrations of how policy is divorced from opinion. But I don't think it's a matter of people. I think what this shows is that people have the, if you want, spiritual resources to give the right answers. But how about doing something about it? That takes a little more than giving the right answers to a poll taker. And I think that's the question. Why do we stop short of doing the things that we know we should do? Actually, there's an interesting article by George Orwell on this. Everybody here read Animal Farm in elementary school. Very few people read the introduction to Animal Farm, which Orwell wrote. It wasn't published. It was found 30 years later in his unpublished papers, and it's kind of interesting. What he says is, it's directed to the people of England, of course, this is his audience. He says, look, the book is a satire on the totalitarian enemy, but people in England shouldn't be too self-righteous about it. Because he says, in free England, I'm quoting now, ideas can be suppressed without the use of force. Then he gives a couple of examples and a few sentences of explanation. One reason he says is the press is owned by wealthy men who have every reason not to want certain ideas to be suppressed. But then there's another reason, which I think is more significant. He says a good education. If you've gone to the best schools, you went to Cambridge and Oxford, Harvard and Yale and so on, you have instilled into you the understanding that there are certain things it just wouldn't do to say. I don't think he goes far enough. It wouldn't do to think, even. That's a large part of what a good education is. So you don't see things that are right in front of your eyes. Like, take everything I mentioned, which I think is pretty easy to document. It's right in front of our eyes. Why does it surprise anyone? Why isn't it taught in elementary school? Well, it's a good reason. got to keep the population in the dark. And we internalize it, especially people like us. You know, I'm sure most of us have had what are called good educations, best colleges and so on. You know, you get instilled it into you. The idea that you shouldn't think about certain things, and you shouldn't do anything, even if you know that the fate of your grandchildren depends on it. Shouldn't do it, you know. But that can be overcome.